Hey guys, my name is Kelly McCoy, and I am the privileged, proud pastor here at the Rocky Peak Young Adults. So I'm stoked to be here. I know that you guys are stoked to be here too. Can we thank our worship team for just bringing us into God's presence? It's awesome, man. I'm so thankful. We have been in a series for the past couple weeks called Bystander, and I took a break from Bystander last week so that we can just, catch up to the new year. And before we start looking ahead, let's take some time to look back, because hindsight is, of course, 2020, right? And that's exactly what I said multiple times. And of course, I'm a dad, and that's a funny dad joke, okay? If you ever heard one. And so one of the things that I like to do is a Q&R at the end of every message. So I've shortened the message times so that I can make space to hear from you. And I honestly do want to address the things that you want to talk about. So one of the things I want to ask you to do right now is to take out your phones and put in this number. It's 949-791 9377. I'll say it again. And actually, can we jump to a slide that actually has that? So it's 949-791 9377. Oh, yeah. Sweet. Yeah, so basically, oftentimes we go to church and we hear things that we hear answers to questions that we were never asking. And really, I want to make sure that this time is as fruitful as possible, that you are getting biblical responses to questions that you are dealing with in your life. And so I just don't want tonight to be another night where you show up to church and you hear an answer to a question that you're not even asking. Does that make sense? Sweet. You're the man. I love the response. Because it's kind of like a conversation where just I'm talking, also known as a monologue. Speaking of questions, I'm looking forward to the day where Deacon starts asking lots of questions. I know that you may have siblings and they do that and you find it annoying, but I'm actually looking forward to it, because questions tell me that somebody's actually learning, or someone's actually listening, or someone's responding to the world around them. And so when he asks, when Deacon will get to the point where he's like, oh, why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? Why do girls act like that? Like, I wanna actually engage with those type of questions. But there's one particular question that puzzles a lot of Christians, and I briefly touched on it last week, and it's, why does God allow so much suffering in this world? And that's like a question that puzzles a lot of Christians, and it puzzles people that aren't Christians. In fact, a lot of people use that as a reason not to believe in God. But I believe firmly that there's two ways to respond to that question. One is an attempt to preserve God's character, and the other one requires you to actually trust God, period. And last week, I gave you a response for why God allows evil that actually preserves the character of God and puts the blame on humans. Where why does God allow evil? I don't know. Why do you keep committing evil crimes? Whenever you think about somebody who asks the question, why does God allow evil out there in the world? They tend not to include themselves. Because there's not evil out there, perhaps there's evil in here. And the reason why there's evil out there is because there's evil in here, in our hearts. Because humans do evil things. And we live in a world where God has given us the ability to choose evil so that choice can exist. Because if you don't have choice, you don't have love. And so, a better question to ask is, why does God allow you, who do evil things? Perhaps it's so that one day you might choose not evil and you'll choose Jesus. So, that takes the weight off of God as a character. But there's a second way that the Bible answers that question, and it's really uncomfortable. And Jesus, and here we are in John chapter 9, and Jesus is going to answer that question to his disciples. And the answer is unsettling, but it's true. We talked about that last week. These things can be true and unsettling at the same time. Like what's happening in the world right now. It's happening. It's true. It's unsettling, but true. And the unsettling truth for some, and maybe comforting for others, sometimes God allows suffering so that he would get glory. so that his work would be on display. That's what Jesus says. Basically, in order for you to accept that answer, your eyes need to be spiritually open. If you don't accept that answer, it's most likely because your eyes are spiritually shut. Right? In order to accept that God would be glorified, you would have to care about God's glory. If you don't care about God's glory, that is a very unsettling answer, but it's still true. So go ahead and open your Bible apps to John chapter 9. I'm going to read through it. It's actually 3 parts. We're going to deal with 2 of the 3 parts because it's kind of long, but it's really interesting because you have this first part where this sign happens. It's a miracle sign, right? So remember, we're in a series called Bystander, where John is a bystander of an action that points to something else, right? Because that's what a sign is. It points to something else. And this particular sign points to Isaiah 42:7, where the Messiah is going to come and open the eyes of the blind. He's going to bring sight to the blind because there's no other miracle that has happened like this. And besides, blindness was pretty prevalent in the ancient world. There was no way to heal like cataracts. There wasn't like eye surgery back in the first century. In fact, most people who did get blindness back then usually got it as a result of an STD or like gonorrhea. You know, when you're born with blindness, it's passed through the mother if you have gonorrhea, of course. And it gets in the eyes of the child and they're born blind. And so that was typically how people were born blind, was typically through STDs. And so it was reasonable for the disciples to think, oh, who sinned, this guy or his mama? And so everybody thought that this mom had a past. So that's a little bit of context. Now here we are in John chapter 9. Jesus just left a really hairy situation. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the teachers of the law picked up rocks to stone him in chapter 8. Right, so they're gonna kill him because Jesus claimed to be God again, and it pissed everybody off. And so they're like, "Oh man, this guy's claiming to be God, and he's healing people on the Sabbath, and he's telling people to get up and walk." So they pick up a stone, and they're about to stone him. But Jesus actually gets away. He walks away from that situation, and as he's walking away from the situation, because something compels these people to not kill Jesus at that time, he's walking away. But then he stops and something happens. Verse 1. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus replies, "Neither this man or his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him." Now that's unsettling. I don't know what you're going through, and I know that there's people in your life that don't believe in God who come to you with this question. Why would God allow these people to suffer? And now if you were to give them the first question or the first response, that sounds settling. But if you were to say the thing that Jesus just said, that would seem very unsettling. Why did this person get cancer? Why did this person die of COVID? Why did this person get COVID in the first place? Why did COVID exist? Why is there suffering in the world, Kelly? Well, so that the works of God would be on display? Can't you see the works of God on display? Can you see it? No. Well, that's the truth. Unsettling that it may be. Should I continue? Okay. Verse 4. As long as it's day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Basically, Jesus is saying it doesn't get any clearer than this, pointing to himself. Right? While it is day, you can see clearly. While I'm here, you can see clearly. While this is happening, though he is blind, he's going to see clearly. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, and he put it on the man's face. If I were a middle school pastor, okay, I'll do it anyways. All right. How much mud would you have to produce to get enough mud for 2 eyes on one person's face? And what kind of scene would you have to make in front of a temple, mind you? You were in front of a temple. Like, not just once or twice. Like, you have to produce a lot of salvific saliva in order to produce some miracle mud. Right? I'm just saying, like, or he's just there and he's like, give me a glass of water, and then he's just spewing. I'm like, what is he doing? Jesus. I wonder what his disciples are saying. I wonder what that conversation was like later on. Anyways, verse 7, mud is already on this man's face. Now, here's the thing. This is a blind beggar, right? So if you're blind and you're begging, 2 things happen. Well, other than you being blind. And but if you're begging, that means your family can't take care of you. So he's poor. He's a poor blind beggar, much like us spiritually. Verse 7, Jesus said this, Go, he told him, and wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man did exactly what Jesus asks you to do every day. What did he do? He walked by faith and not by sight. All right. So the man went and washed and came home. He went home seeing. Verse 8. You guys are with me in verse 8? All right, good. This is going to be a minute. We have like 32 verses. Just kidding. His neighbors, I won't, maybe I will. All right. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some claim that he was, but others, they say, no, that just looks like him. But he said, and insisted, no, I'm the man. I am that man. The poor, blind, begging guy, that's me. I'm the dude. And I have blue eyes. Green, red, I don't know. Red, it's been a while since I've seen. And it's muddy water. Like, come on. Verse 10. How then were your eyes open, they asked. He replied, the man they called Jesus, like, I don't know Jesus, but I heard about this guy. The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go wash in the pool of Siloam. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Bam. Where is this man, they asked. I don't know. I didn't see him. Right? Like, that's, like, he's blind. Like, whatever. Come on. People ask the funniest questions. Okay. So that's the miracle. So that's the first part. You guys get that? You guys read that? You grew up in, Awanas or Sunday school or VeggieTales and you heard about it, right? That's the part that we see and we're like, wow, Jesus is so awesome. But look what happened to the man, right? Now, this man has to defend himself to religious leaders. Imagine this. I've been in situations like this. Your biology teacher says there's no God, and now there's no longer measuring time in AD and BC, but it's now BCE and CE, right? Common Era and before Common Era, right? And that you are just a cosmic, you're a cosmological byproduct of a few different universes colliding into each other or something. And one day there was goo, and that goo turned into you, right? Imagine that situation. Maybe you've been in that situation. But this biology teacher is using a lot of words with big, like just lots of syllables. Like cosmological. Whoa. Like, I don't know. Cosmological is not that big. But I can't spell it. Don't even ask. Ask Nick, though. He can spell. But just imagine that situation. And you're like, no, I'm going to debate you right here in front of all my peers. Right now. I'm no monkey's uncle. God's not dead. He's surely alive. He's living on the inside. All right, so imagine that situation. That's what this guy has to do with these rabbis, these Pharisees and Sadducees and teachers of the law. They grew up. They're the smartest and they're the wisest, right? You would have to debate like you just were transformed. You're the byproduct of a miracle, and now you're going to take on these Pharisees. So this is what happened. Okay, I don't even know why I did that. Verse 13, they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now, the day in which Jesus had made the mud and opened the eyes, guess what? Was the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath, you're not supposed to work. And somehow making mud and healing somebody is a violation of the Sabbath. Anybody know why? Well, it's their interpretation of the Sabbath. It's actually not a violation of the Sabbath because obviously kneading mud is like making bricks, like the kind of bricks that we used to make in Exodus when we were building all those, pyramids for those Egyptian slave masters. Ugh. So no brick making on the Sabbath, right? So Jesus is kneading and making mud on the Sabbath and making everybody mad at the same time. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him, How did you receive sight? He put mud on my eyes, the man said, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees says, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner perform such a sign? So they were divided. So if he's actually the Messiah, he wouldn't sin, right? The Messiah can't sin. But since the Messiah is doing things on the Sabbath, he's sinning, and so therefore he's a sinner. So he can't be God if he's a sinner. So that's the logic that they're bringing into this picture. But he's not sinning. He's just going against their interpretation of the law, which was a bad interpretation that they used to actually unlove people. They were using the law to unlove people, which was way, way more sinful than healing somebody on the Sabbath. Anyways, verse 17. Then they turned again to the blind man. What have you have to say about him? What do you have to say? Because people are divided. And they're like, let's just go to the source. Miracle dude, or formerly blind man. What do you have to say about this Jesus guy? And he's like, well, he's a prophet. In verse 18, they still did not believe that he had been blind and received sight until they sent for the man's parent. They're like, we're done talking to you. Let's get your mama in here. Verse 19, is this your son? They asked. Is this the one you say that was born blind? How is it that he can see now? Verse 20. We know that he is our son, the parents answered. And we know that he was born blind. But how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's 18 or he's of age. He will speak for himself. Right? This is really, really important because the synagogue is now divided into two camps. And if the parents show up to the synagogue and they're like, well, we're going to side with our son, well, they're going to get kicked out of the synagogue. So they're like, no, ask him. Leave us out of this. Verse 22, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who had already decided, they pre-decided, this is called, it's a fallacy, but they have already, confirmation bias. So they were given into confirmation bias. They've pre-decided what they believed about the situation, regardless of the evidence. So who had already decided that anyone who acknowledged Jesus was Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Verse 23. And that's why his parents said, ask him, he's of age, leave us out of this. Kind of irresponsible parents. I don't know if I want dads and moms like that. 24. A second time, they summoned the man. They're like, okay, let's bring the formerly blind man back in here. This interrogation. A second time, they summoned the man, and they said this, give glory to God by telling us the truth. Right? What are they saying? They're saying, God is watching. Tell us the real truth. God is watching. We know this man is a sinner. It was Sabbath. Verse 25. Blind man speaking right here. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But one thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see. Now pause there. I love that. Because that is the testimony of every single person that has decided to give their life to Jesus and become transformed. I was once blind and now I see. That's what all of us were before Christ. No one is born a Christian. No one is born actually spiritually seeing. always comes with an interaction where your heart wanted itself, and then suddenly you started to want the things of God. Your situation, your circumstances may never have changed, but you changed. Something in you changed. And that's what happened with this man. He couldn't articulate it other than I was once blind and now I see. And that's all of our story. Verse 26, then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Verse 27, he answered, I have told you already, and you still did not listen. Did we not talk about this? Because people who suffer from confirmation bias aren't really listening unless you're saying the things that they want to hear. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Now he's going toe-to-toe with the math teacher. He's going toe-to-toe with the biology teacher right now. Do you want to become his disciple too? And now, when you're losing an argument, you stop being rational. You start calling names. And that's exactly what the Pharisees start doing to this formerly blind man. Verse 28. Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciples. We are the disciples of Moses. Oh, that'll get him. We know that God spoke to Moses, but for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. Take that, blind, poor man. Verse 30, the man answered, that is remarkable. Like, this guy is super sassy at this point. Like, he's got super sass. Now, that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, right? I'm following your logic. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners. That's what the Pharisees were saying. He listens to only godly persons who do his will. Verse 32, no one has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. Now, this is the first time in all of biblical history where somebody who was born blind can see. In all of the Old Testament, there's none of these. There's just not a miracle like this. Isaiah 42:7 talks about the Messiah. So if you want to look at all the signs that all these are based on, it's in Isaiah chapter 42. And the verse goes like this. He will open the eyes of the blind. So basically give sight to those who are blind and preach freedom to the captives. Verse 33. If this man were not from God, he can do nothing according to the logic that we just talked about. So again, they resorted to name calling because that's what you do when you're losing an argument. Because your brain stops working and you revert to your 10-year-old self. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Verse 35. They threw this man out. He's rejected. First of all, he was rejected by society, rejected by his family, now rejected by the religious leaders. But guess who comes after him? I know. You read that. You read ahead, didn't you? Verse 35. Verse 35. Jesus heard that they have thrown him out. Wow, it must be a big deal that they threw this guy out. Because word got around to Jesus, and when he had found him, he said this, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? He's talking to Jesus. He, you know what? I guess he didn't see that coming. Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said, you have now seen him, and in fact, he is the one speaking to you. Mic drop. Boom, right there, right. He's the one speaking to you. And guess how the man responds? And this is how we respond when we realize Jesus is in the room. When you realize Jesus is in the room, no matter how bad the situation is, no matter how bad you're suffering, no matter what circumstances happen around you, the world can be blowing up, but when Jesus is in the room, this is how we respond. This is exactly how this man responded after he'd been rejected by society, family, and the religious leaders. Then the man said, Lord, I believe. And he dropped down and he worshiped him. And you know what Jesus didn't do? Tell him to stop? He received worship. You know what that means? He's either God or crazy. Only God can receive worship. So, that's our passage for today. And there's a couple things I want to bring to your attention out of this. And I wanted you to get the whole passage. I'm not going to preach on every verse in this passage, but I wanted you to get a picture of it. And I hope you saw it. And I hope my reading, my bad reading or the numbers and the Bible, I hope it just didn't confuse you. But I want you to know the first thing is that Jesus stopped for a man who couldn't see him. And even though he couldn't see him, he saw him. Basically, even though you can't see Jesus, Jesus sees you. That's the point. Verse 1 says, as he went along, he saw a man born blind from birth. See, Jesus sees you in the midst of your suffering, in the midst of all the chaos in your life, in the midst of the mud and the mire that you are living in. Because when failed expectations have you expected to be further along in your education. You might have expected to be further along in your relationships or in your non-relationship. Or you may have expected to be further along in your career or have more influence. You may expect to have certain rights or certain freedoms. But when those expectations meet reality and those expectations don't meet reality, you tend to feel like you're suffering. Am I right? It's like being blinded. You're blinded by failed expectations and then you suffer and people suffer around you. And when that happens, I want you to know that Jesus sees you even if you can't see him. Because maybe all you're looking at is your failed expectations at the moment. And Jesus not only saw you or sees you now, he saw you at the beginning of time before you were born. Psalm 139 says it this way. For you created my inmost being. David is speaking poetically and prophetically. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Jesus sees you even though you don't see him. Even in your mother's womb. Out of the 100 million sperm racing to that egg, there's a reason why you were the winner. Because God was going to paint a picture of himself through your life. The Hebrew word for fearfully and wonderfully made is poema. You're God's poem. His song. And a song that's awesomely perfect and everything is just whatever, it's not interesting. But your life is meant to be a picture of God. I just want you to know he sees you. I guess that's the first thing. Whenever you're feeling overlooked, whenever you're feeling passed by, insignificant or ignored, which is how I feel every day, I struggle with those thoughts and I have to remind myself that it's okay if you don't see me because he does. It's okay if you pass me by because he didn't. It's okay if you think I'm insignificant because he doesn't. He sees me. He sees you. The second thing I want you to know is that suffering is but a shadow. Suffering is but a shadow. You know shadows. Shadows look bigger than they are. And they can't hurt you. Have you ever been hit by the shadow of a truck? Did you survive? I'm sure you did. It's just a shadow. Shadows can't hurt you. Suffering is a shadow. Verse 4, John 9, he says it this way. As long as it's day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming. Night is coming. When no one can work. No one but Jesus, of course. See, we love the day work, but we don't like the night work. See, the day work is the healing work. It's the rescuing from suffering work. It's the deliverance from demons work. We see that during the day and we're like, yeah, Jesus. It's the day work. But the night work, well, that's the guilt removal work where you come clean to Jesus and you admit that you're a sinner and you need to be saved. It's the repentance work. It's the wrath removal work. It's the Satan defeating work. It's the death defeating work. So we got to understand, Jesus was doing some day work. It wasn't his time for the lights to go out. Suffering is but a shadow. I want to share this one verse, Revelation 21:4. You can write it down. But this is the end. This is the end of time. And this is the hope that we have in Jesus. He will wipe away every tear. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, for the old order of things have passed away. Man. See, this is the place where you experience suffering and pain. It makes heaven that much sweeter. This is not heaven. This is not meant to be heaven. And I love the verse in a worship song that says, earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. Earth has no sorrow. No matter how bad things get, in your life, 80 billion years in eternity with Jesus, you're not going to care. You're just not. Every promise, every pain, every suffering, every tear is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And our hope is for eternity and not here. Suffering is but a shadow. Next point is that his methods are messy. This is what you need to know. That whenever you're suffering, whenever expectations meet reality, you're like, this is messy. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. So this is the messy part of the miracle that kind of gets me. It probably gets you too. It makes you stop and be like, what are you doing, Jesus? Verse 6, he says, after saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud, and with his saliva, he put it on the man's eyes. So the big question is, why is Jesus spitting on people? Like, Jesus, why are you spitting on people, right? Like I would just be so bothered by this. Because he's Jesus. He can just be like, okay, psych, B, right? Like, he just be like, I see you, now you see me, bam, right? Like, he could just do that. He could. But why does he have to do this big thing? Because Jesus' methods of whatever miracle he's doing in your life, whatever restoration he's doing in your life, whatever transformation is happening in your life right now, it's going to be messy. It's going to be messy. You cannot predict the way or dictate the way God wants to heal you or not heal you, which is what we'll see next week with Lazarus. So I read some commentaries, and some commentaries say, the reason why he did this is because it's a picture of the gospel, because the gospel's messy, because, like, what's messier than God letting his son die a horrendous death by the people he made, right? That's pretty messy, right? The next commentator said, because he wanted to let people know that this is a front to the Sabbath. Like, the way you guys are treating the Sabbath is not the way it should be treated. So spitting in front of the temple, making mud, telling this guy to walk and then go wash himself, which may be another form of work. Like, he did this so that he can confront people's expectations of what they thought the Sabbath was, which I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. I can see that. And then another commentator said, because this is a picture of creation. Guess what humans are made out of? Dirt. Apparently dirt does hurt because we hurt each other. And the same creative genius that Jesus used to create the world was the same creative genius that Jesus used to restore this man's sight. And actually, there is an evolutionary argument that atheists or evolutionists cannot overcome. It's there's a law of irreducible complexities, and the illustration is used with the eye, where the eye cannot evolve. There's too many parts that need to evolve at the same time. And so that's an argument that maybe some people can overcome, but it's actually a really hard one for atheistic evolutionists have a hard time resolving the issue of the evolving eye because of irreducible complexities. Nevertheless, I thought this was interesting. All right, next commentator is that Jesus did this because he didn't want anybody else to get, he didn't want anybody to think that the mud had any healing power or the spit had any healing power, because Jesus himself wanted to get the credit. He did something so ridiculous so that you can't help but to say, okay, that guy did it. Jesus, like I can't explain the dirt, I can't explain right? So that's why he did that, and I thought that was interesting. But let me just remind you about the messiness of life and how beautiful it is. How each one of you is one beautiful mess. You can turn to your neighbor and be like, you're a beautiful mess. But don't aspirate while doing that. So I like a clean car, man. I like a clean car. Does anybody know me? You know I like a clean car. I got the Speed Wash. You know the Speed Wash where there's one on First and then there's one on Madera, right? So I go there every day. I got the subscription where I just beep in and I go and I clean my car, right? Because I need it clean all the time. But a car well lived in is not going to be clean. Am I right, Kaylee? Kaylee's on my team. I love her. She also takes care of horses, and it's obvious. Just kidding. And I would not do that to any of you guys. But her car tells a story, and it's a beautiful story. She's an equestrian genius, right? And ask her stories about it. It's really magnificent. Now, if her car was clean, you wouldn't have a reason to ask her about one of her passions, right? There's a beautiful story behind the mess of her car. My story is somewhat boring, right? Actually, right now, there's some Cheetos and the crackers, whatever, because I got a kid. But same thing with your life. Your life has stories. And I bet they're not all clean. But messiness, without Jesus, there's no meaning there. There's no meaning behind that mess. But Jesus actually gives us meaning behind the messes of our lives. Jesus brings meaning to the mess that you are going through right now. See, we're made out of dirt, and you might be in the dirty spots of your life and you're trying to get yourself out. May I suggest that you just add some water? Some divine living water? Maybe the water of life? And add some meaning to your mess? Perhaps. Whatever Jesus is doing in your life, I know it might be messy, but there's meaning behind it. Okay, next thing I want you to take away. I know I might be a little bit over it because I can't see Brianna because there's lights in front of my face. Where am I at, Bri? All right. All right. The last point is that worship brings clarity. Worship just brings clarity. You're like, how does worship bring clarity? See, this man just went through a horrible situation. Not only was he rejected by family, rejected by religious leaders, and rejected by society. Here we are in verse 35. Jesus heard that he was thrown out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Who's he?" And he's like, "Well, I'm the guy." Verse 38. The man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. Please, let's not underestimate what worship does for our lives. Some of us, we get in our cars and we blast secular music, and I'm all like, I like music. I'm a DJ. I DJ weddings. All you engaged people, what's up? Just kidding. That's for 2535, I guess. But there's something that worship does to an atmosphere. Because worship there's nothing magical in the notes. There's nothing magical in the beats. Worship is just prayers written to music. Does that make sense? When you don't know what to pray, just sing a worship song. Wouldn't you agree, Reed? Yeah, I mean, sometimes you don't know what to pray. You're probably out there singing in the woods, right? Like Jesus and stuff, right? So one of the things early on when I got married, and you guys will figure this out, I fought a lot with my wife. Like we've been married 9 years. We've been happily married for 5 of them, right? And so the first couple years was a lot of conflict. You got two cultures coming together. All the endorphins are just kind of like thrown out the window. You're no longer making excuses to stay with each other. You're no longer desperate for a relationship. Now you're starting to see each other clearly, and you have to overcome some of your expectations of what you thought marriage was and wasn't. And you got to get rid of all those Disney videos that are spinning in your brain. Thank you, Disney. So one of the ways that subside some of the conflict that we were having in our house was I bought the cheapest Amazon Bluetooth speaker, and I just started putting worship songs on loop off Spotify. I just let worship music go all the time, even when I was gone. I was hoping my dog would get saved, right? And but it's really hard to be defensive, to be impatient, to be selfish when you have I give my life to you, Jesus, all the time. I just long for your glory to come, like in the background. It's just hard, It's hard to do that because worship just brings clarity to pretty much every situation. When I hate going to the hospital. I hate it. Which, the best part of COVID is that they don't want me there. My doctor's like, nah, you just walk it off, right? My leg hurts. I just walk it off. You don't want to come here. But when I would go to the doctors, or when I would, I had a urethral fist, and I'll tell you more about that. Basically, your belly button starts leaking, and so I had to go in for surgery, and I would just bring, I would write prayers. I would write a worship song out, and then I had the nurse read it to me while I was being sedated, and I don't know what that meant to her or whatever. I never saw her the rest of my life, but I got my paper back, and I would just listen to worship music when I drove there and drove back whenever I'm in a hard situation. Another time is when Michelle was in labor. Now that was a situation, man. I'll tell you that story. But I was like, man, I'm so glad I have leather seats. Like we're driving and she's about to give birth in the car. She's mooing like a cow. This is happening. This is so messed up. Anyways, worship. We finally get to the hospital. We get there, and I have my Amazon Bluetooth speaker, and I say, hey, doctor or lady or midwife, can I put the speaker here and play worship music while we do this? And they're like, yeah, sure. And they're like, wow, I would hear them say, I haven't been to church in years. We're so glad that you guys came in tonight. This blessed us. And this was a horrific experience for me. Nevertheless, here, in fact, I brought some pictures. Just kidding. But the whole time we have worship going. But it really does bring clarity. And now every time I do a Q&R, which we may do right now, remember, get your phones out, 949-791-9377. People ask all the time, is it a sin, ... Is it a sin to cross over this line with my girlfriend or boyfriend, or girlfriends, plural, or boyfriends, plural? Or is it a sin if I don't do this or do this? And then I want to say the dad thing. You know what the dad thing is? If you're asking, it's probably yes. That's the dad thing. But the reality is, 1 Corinthians says it this way, and I love it. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, do it all for the glory of God. Right? Do it all for the glory of God. So that the deeds of God may be revealed. Why are you doing this? Whatever you're doing, however you're suffering, or even if you're not suffering, however you are recreating, do it in such a way so that the deeds of God are revealed. And one of the easiest way to do that is play some worship music. Play some worship music on your date. Play some worship music while you scroll. Play some worship music while you scan, or when you're getting dressed, or whoever you're talking to, or whatever you're touching. Sing some worship songs, and then you'll know whether or not you should or should not do it. Because worship brings clarity. All right, I'll conclude now. Thank you guys for being so patient every week. It's such a joy to bring God's word, and I hope you hear from Jesus more than you hear from me. So what I want you to know is that you're seen by Jesus. And that suffering is just shadow. And you can't predict the methods in which Jesus wants to heal you because his methods are messy. And worship defeats worry, and it brings clarity every single time. And my prayer is that you would find yourself cross-eyed in the midst of a world full of disappointment, full of suffering. Let's pray. Father, I pray that you would bring sight to those who are spiritually blind today. That if they didn't see you before now, I pray that they would see you clearly now.